Trapped in a time loop, a man has repeated the day of his death over and over again. It will continue until he figures out how to escape. That's why today is just another day to die. This is the story of Roy, who for some time now has been woken up in the morning by a man trying to kill him. And although this should scare anyone, Roy doesn't seem to care much because we see him defend himself calmly. Because he knows exactly what is going to happen, as he has lived this day almost 140 times. He even has an alarm on his watch that alerts him just when he needs to jump from his building to avoid dying in an explosion. He also knows the exact moment the truck passes by, having died 22 times for miscalculating it. It's not the first time he's stolen this orange car. He even knows by heart what the owner will yell and repeats it along with him for fun. He enters the car and flees from two girls he calls Esmeralda and Pam. Just as everything seems to be going well, he gets hit by a bus. Roy recalls past attempts like number 79, where he escapes the man by waking up. But the helicopter that arrives afterwards kills him. He also tells us that there are many people trying to kill him, among them Pam, whom we already know and who has done it about 14 times. And also Guan Yin, who succeeded on the 69th attempt, and a dwarf made him explode on the 88th. On the 93rd attempt, the killer was a man identical to him, making it one of the most memorable ones. Despite occasionally killing some of his enemies, they always find him and he ends up dead. So, even though his days have some variations, it's always the same ending. And Roy confesses to us that no matter how much he repeats it daily, it never stops being painful. He also didn't have time to find out who is chasing him or why they want to finish him off. From the moment he wakes up in the morning, they start chasing him. Roy remembers the attempt, especially the 48, because that time he called his ex-girlfriend Gemma, whom he still loves at work. And Colonel Clive Ventor, who is his boss, told him that she died in a lab accident. And before he can learn more, two men blow him up. But attempt 140 comes along, and it seems to go very well, as he manages to survive all the enemies. He visits a Chinese restaurant, where after drinking he meets Dave, a security expert who will later assist him. The truth is that Roy has also repeated this moment several times, so he knows the exact moment when a famous world champion swordswoman will enter. And also that Dave must return to work at 12:20. Then, Roy feels happy for having arrived at the restaurant on time and drinking enough not to suffer with what's coming. He knows that at 12:47, all his enemies will come for him. In this instance, he doesn't resist, as they always locate him before he can live beyond that point in time. Now, with the knowledge of his ex-girlfriend's death, he seeks revenge. But to understand a bit more about what's happening, we go back to yesterday, and by yesterday, we mean the day before the start of this time loop. When Roy visits Gemma in the lab, and in the middle of an awkward conversation, he hands her his resume because he was looking for a job. Afraid of being seen by the security camera, Gemma takes some measurements. He thinks it's for his uniform, and when he asks about his salary, they discover that Ventor, their boss, and Brett, the head of security, are spying on them. Meanwhile, she tells Roy that she is working on a project that destroys time. But he gets distracted by the photo of his son, whom he hasn't seen in years. As they argue, Brett interjects, stating that visitors are not authorized. She takes Roy's resume and departs. Gemma inexplicably takes a strand of Roy's hair, reminds him to check her recent gift, and tells him to remember a word before leaving. Then she arrives at her boss's office and informs him about a minor delay in the project. So they start to have a tense conversation in which Ventor forbids her from visiting or being delayed any longer. Later, Roy is at a bar flirting with the blonde woman he wakes up with on the day he dies. And as they talk, we find out that his new conquest is a dentist. Gemma calls Roy to the bar as she places his hair in a container and a capsule. But when she starts asking for help, the call starts to fail, and it's Ventor who makes her hang up, and although he's worried, he doesn't do much to stay with the blonde woman. Gemma takes the capsule, prompting Ventor to order her capture. Returning to the present, in attempt 141, Roy overcomes initial obstacles and recalls Gemma's gift. Upon opening the book, he starts reading, forgetting about the men from the helicopter who then kill him instantly. Then he tries again, and when he starts to read, the white bus kills him. In the following cycle, he drives without reading and misses the restaurant. As in attempt 51, a man known as Smiley kills him again. On his 144th attempt, Roy decides to find a quiet place to read the book. Upon entering a building, he spots his son Joe taking something from a stranger and pursues him. The boy admits to him that he skipped school to attend a video game convention. When asked about what the stranger gave him, he discovers it's a card game, not drugs. Then they leave the place calmly and Roy realizes it's 12:50, which means he has lived 3 minutes longer than usual. He begins to believe that he has a global positioning system implant and being underground prevents him from being tracked. Despite his wish for it to be the last time, Roy is killed again but wakes up once more, determined to discover the location of the tracker. So he goes to the Chinese restaurant and decides to ask Dave, who tells him that the best way to hide a global positioning system is to implant it in a tooth. Roy then remembers sleeping with a dentist. He goes to the restaurant bathroom and removes his teeth in front of a horrified Dave, who finds the global positioning system. But a few seconds later they kill him. Yes, again! Attempt 145 comes. And after waking up and surviving the first attack, Roy forces the blonde woman to give him information about the global positioning system. He finds out that the head of security at Gemma's company was the one who put the tracker on him. So then he manages to place the tracker in an abandoned place, where he manages to kill Pam. Then he gathers the bodies of all his pursuers and blows them up, then takes the phone from one of them. And tell Brett that he's coming for him. So he speeds off in his car and tries to force his way into the building, but he doesn't succeed. Then Brett arrives to kill him. In the next attempt, Brett also surprises him and kills him. And in attempt 147, another security guard kills him in the elevator. And so his death repeats a few more times until in attempt 153 he meets Guan Yin. And well, you know. And it's not until attempt 156 that despite losing again, Roy speaks to Ventor during his somewhat dull speech, not paying much attention to it. But then the Colonel mentions Gemma and right after they cut off his head, but thanks to this, Roy manages to know 3 things. That he has to kill Ventor, that when he died he was inside something called Use of Osiris, and that the Colonel doesn't know that repeating the day over and over again is working. After waking up, Roy realizes that Gemma transformed him into Osiris so he could prevent the Colonel from carrying out their plans. So he approaches the swordswoman from the Chinese restaurant to ask her to teach him how to use a sword. One attempt, 158. He starts practicing and continues for about 20 more attempts. On attempt 200, Roy prepares to attack Guan Yin. Despite struggling initially, he manages to kill her to then say what we all wanted to hear. I am Roy and Roy did this. Brett appears but Roy kills him quickly. And then they start fighting with the Colonel until he manages to stab the sword into his hand and stops to talk to him. Until Ventor discovers that Gemma was able to activate the use of Osiris. And to threaten our protagonist, he tells him that if he kills him, no one will be able to save his son. So Roy cuts off his head and rushes to find Joe, but it's too late because he's also dead. And there he asks himself if he has let his son die the same number of times he has relived this day. When he attempts to approach Joe's body, an explosion erupts, signaling the apocalypse. And in a matter of seconds, everything ends again. But knowing that both Gemma and his son are dead, Roy loses the motivation to keep trying. In the subsequent cycles, he allows himself to be killed without resisting. One day, he grows weary, and his sole motivation becomes spending his final day with his son. And he decides to go with him in the next 2 attempts to be together, each time the end of the world occurs. But in one conversation, they start discussing Gemma, and his son tells him that he received a call from her that morning in which he told him to look for her to be safe. Roy checks the phone log and discovers Gemma is alive the time each attempt begins, so there is still hope to save her. So, in the next cycle, Roy quickly arrives at the building to kill Ventor and Brett. But as he agonizes, the security chief tells him that Gemma triggered an endless time loop which they don't know how to fix. Right after, our protagonist sees in a security video that 14 minutes after the time he always wakes up, Gemma is still alive, so he decides to kill himself to try to get to her in time. So, in the next attempt, Roy hijacks the helicopter that had previously killed him. And so he arrives at the building where he faces many security men and kills all his enemies again. Then he has time to kill Brett and the general, and there he reunites with Gemma, who is surprised to see him. Despite having little time, Roy assures her not to worry about Joe, as he has killed everyone, making it impossible for them to harm their son. Gemma then tells him she used his DNA to trap him in the time loop, and that he must enter the machine, because the usage needs to be reset for everything to end. But she isn't certain how it works and doesn't know what will happen when he's in the machine. Still, Roy decides to do it, as the idea is to save them and stop the end of the world. So, with fear, they begin to say goodbye. She confesses her love for him. He asks her to wait as he enters the machine without much thought. Once he's inside, we see how a rapid movement begins at the same time his gaze begins to look lost. His eyes reflect a fleeting white light, but in moments, it all seems to end once more. This was just another day to die. Don't forget to comment which movie you would like me to summarize. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated on new videos.